then you got a better chance.
All right, I'll do that. Here, ready? He gag ordered the EPA from telling the truth on climate change. That's deeply anti-free speech. He arrested and charged 6 journalists with felony rioting. He did not pardon Assange. He did not pardon Snowden. He did not pardon Daniel Hale. He wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy the U.S. to deploy our own troops against George Floyd protesters. These are all things that are actually on the record, things he actually did.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Really appreciate you stopping by today. So in this video, we've got Kyle Kulinski going head-to-head with Piers Morgan, and let me tell you, this gets intense. Piers keeps pushing this narrative that the Democrats lost because of woke politics and identity issues, but Kyle comes back with something Piers clearly wasn't ready for. He starts listing off actual authoritarian actions from the previous administration that the mainstream media, including Piers himself, barely covered. We're talking about journalists being arrested, gag orders on climate science, the whole thing. And when Kyle asked Piers directly if he ever talked about these things, you can feel the tension spike. Make sure you stick around through the entire breakdown because the way this unfolds is absolutely worth seeing. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from right now. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from around the world. All right, let's jump straight into it.
Let's get, well, Kyle, welcome to Uncensored. We're trying to get you for a long time. Let's have a little chat with you before we get reaction from the panel. But why did the Democrats blow it so badly? And what do they do to avoid this happening again in 4 years?
I mean, the simple answer is that Kamala Harris kind of codes as a technocratic status quo manager and Trump codes as a change agent. And so, I mean, to sum it up as simply as possible, voters just thought he's going to deliver more change, she's more of the same, and they broke for him.
Who would you like to see run the party now? I mean, what's the future of the Democrats looking like to you?
Jon Stewart. I've been pushing that since the day Trump won this time around, because what we need is, honestly, a controversial, charismatic celebrity might make all of the difference, but it's that mixed with Bernie Sanders' policies of actually delivering social democracy for people, raising their pay, getting them health care. I think that's the magic stew. And honestly, I think it's a shame that more people aren't talking about the controversial, charismatic celebrity portion of Trump being so successful, is that you can't keep the cameras off him. He's entertaining. Love him or hate him, you can't stop watching him. And so we need to sort of mirror that on the left. And I think the way of doing that is Jon Stewart.
But I would add to that what Bill Maher's been warning for a long time to liberals, speaking as a liberal himself. And I'm pretty much where he is politically, I think. I feel the same way. And I know you've been keen to say, look, Kamala didn't mention any of these woke issues or whatever, but she's very much associated with a lot of those woke issues. She's certainly voted in line with a lot of the more progressive stuff, like allowing transgender athletes in women's sport and so on. So she's seen to be a progressive who then moved rapidly to the centre when she got the nomination, and it was all too much of a screech for people, probably on both sides. But this whole woke ideology, I don't mean the original woke ideology of raising awareness for racial and social injustice. I mean the way it's become a kind of new form of fascism, where the far left just basically want to cancel, shame, and humiliate absolutely anybody who disagrees with them about anything. Do you accept that has become a problem, a stick to beat the party with, which actually really damages them electorally?
No, I think Kamala ran basically the platonic ideal of a non-woke Democratic campaign. She never mentioned race. She never mentioned gender. She never mentioned trans people. She never mentioned pronouns or Latinx or cancel culture. She repeatedly stressed that she was going to represent all Americans. She ran to the right on the issue of the border. She talked about owning a gun. She ran on freedom and patriotism. And so when you put all that stuff together, I simply don't know what people are talking about when they say she's
they're
too woke.
talking about her record.
Those things at all.
Hang on. They're talking about her record as vice president of the Biden administration, where they never stopped talking about this stuff for nearly 4 years. So you can pretend when you get the nomination, whoa, I'm a centrist and I'm a gun-toting Rambo, by the way, as well, to all you Second Amendment people. But actually, if you judge her on what she said and did in 4 years, she was a progressive left person. And to pretend otherwise is to just ignore what went on in that period.
This is exactly why Kyle is one of the sharpest political commentators out there right now. When he says Kamala Harris kind of codes as a technocratic status quo manager and the former president codes as a change agent, he's diagnosing the core problem that establishment Democrats refuse to acknowledge. People didn't reject progressive ideas. They rejected the messenger who couldn't authentically deliver them. And listen to what Kyle proposes as the solution. He says what we need is, honestly, a controversial, charismatic celebrity might make all of the difference, but it's that mixed with Bernie Sanders' policies. This is brilliant because he's not falling into either trap. He's not saying we need to abandon policy for spectacle, and he's not saying policy alone will save us. You need both. You need someone who can command attention and deliver material improvements to people's lives. Think about what he's really saying here. The progressive movement has the most popular policies in America. Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage, paid family leave, these pull at 60-70% support. But we keep losing because we can't communicate effectively. We either get corporate Democrats who water down everything, or we get activists who can't connect with regular people who aren't already politically engaged. Now watch how Piers tries to bait him into defending identity politics. He brings up the whole woke thing, transgender athletes, all of it. And Kyle doesn't take the bait. Instead, he comes back with facts. He says Kamala ran basically the platonic ideal of a non-woke Democratic campaign. She never mentioned race, she never mentioned gender, she never mentioned trans people. This is a fact check in real time. Piers wants to blame the loss on culture war stuff because that's easier than admitting the real problem is economic. It's easier to say Democrats lost because of pronouns than to admit they lost because they couldn't deliver a coherent economic message that resonates with working people. Kyle sees right through this and refuses to play that game. He's forcing the conversation back to what actually matters, which is class politics, not culture war distractions. And you can hear Piers getting frustrated because his usual talking points aren't landing. He tries to say, well, but her record as vice president, as if that changes the fact that her campaign wasn't focused on identity politics. The goalpost keeps moving because the real critique, the one Kyle is making, is that Democrats are too timid and too corporate, not that they're too woke.
What I'm much more concerned about is not Democrats being woke or Democrats censoring speech. I'm much more concerned about Trump's record on those things. So, for example, Trump said he wants to punish flag burning with a year in jail. That's against the First Amendment. He sued CNN for $475 million for calling election denialism the big lie. Before he was president, he sued Bill Maher for $5 million over a joke. He said he wants to open up the libel laws. He called for jailing journalists who report on the Supreme Court abortion ruling early before the decision.
How many of those things did he do in his first term?
Pro-Palestine protesters.
How many of those things did he actually do in his first term? Because it seems to me another problem, and he does this brilliantly, by the way, with the left. He sucks you in because he just shoots from the hip and he says stuff that crosses his mind or whatever. And rather than pick him off on stuff he actually does, you all go completely nuts every time he opens his mouth and says something a bit crazy. And if I was advising the Democrats, I'd be like, stop doing this. You're literally playing into his trap every time you do this. Just pick him off on the stuff he actually does. Then you got a better chance.
All right, I'll do that. Here, ready? He gag ordered the EPA from telling the truth on climate change. That's deeply anti-free speech. He arrested and charged 6 journalists with felony rioting. He did not pardon Assange. He did not pardon Snowden. He did not pardon Daniel Hale. He wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy the U.S. to deploy our own troops against George Floyd protesters. These are all things that are actually on the record, things he actually did. And the thing that I find incredibly frustrating is that nobody talks about it. Trump magically gets a pass for things he actually did.
He doesn't get
Democrats
a pass.
get held to a super high standard.
Come on, he doesn't get a pass.
How many times have you heard people say those things I just told you?
Trump has had...
Wait.
Hang on. Let me answer you.
When was the last time you heard
Trump
that?
has had the most unrelentingly hostile media from a mainstream media that is largely staffed by liberals. We know this because of the way they all go nuts when their paper wouldn't come out and endorse Kamala and they all resign, so they reveal their true colours. Cable news the same, MSNBC, CNN, you can fire a harpoon around their newsrooms and you wouldn't hit a conservative, right? So let's just get real about the way mainstream media is made up. I've worked in it, and there are very few conservatives, and that is part of the problem as well. And I just think that ultimately, if the Democrats are going to try and make themselves electable, they've got to move wholesale on now to a far more effective way of campaigning. And it can't just be every time Donald Trump speaks, mass hysteria, shaving your head, going on TikTok and posting videos of yourself screaming and saying you'll never have sex with a Trump supporter again. All this stuff is insane.
How about just telling the truth? Wait. How about just telling the truth? That's a radical idea, right? When was the last time you heard that Trump arrested and charged 6 journalists with felony rioting? Who talked about that? Did CNN talk about that? Did MSNBC talk about that? Did you talk about that? Nobody talks about it.
Here is where Kyle absolutely dismantles the entire narrative. Piers wants to talk about Democrats and cancel culture and wokeness, but Kyle flips it completely. He pivots to authoritarianism, and suddenly Piers is on defense. Kyle says so, for example, he said he wants to punish flag burning with a year in jail. That's against the First Amendment. He sued CNN for $475 million. These are facts. These are things that actually happened. And watch what Piers does. He immediately tries to minimize it by asking how many of those things did he actually do in his first term. This is the problem with mainstream media coverage right here. They treat authoritarian threats as theoretical until they happen. And then when they happen, they memory hole them immediately. It's this constant cycle of downplaying and forgetting. But Kyle doesn't let him off the hook. He comes back even harder. He says he gag ordered the EPA from telling the truth on climate change. That's deeply anti-free speech. He arrested and charged 6 journalists with felony rioting. 6 journalists arrested and charged with felonies for covering protests. And Kyle is right to ask, when was the last time you heard about this? When did CNN spend a week covering the fact that 6 journalists were arrested under the previous administration? The answer is never, because the media has this bizarre relationship where they'll call someone a threat to democracy in op-eds, but then they won't actually cover the specific authoritarian actions in detail. They'll focus on tweets and controversies instead of the systematic attacks on press freedom, on climate science, on the right to protest. And then Kyle hits him with the perfect question. He says, did CNN talk about that? Did MSNBC talk about that? Did you talk about that? Nobody talks about it. He's not just criticizing conservative media or right-wing propaganda. He's holding the liberal media accountable for their failures too, because they're part of the problem. They obsess over palace intrigue and polling and ignore actual erosions of democratic norms when it's inconvenient. This is what separates someone like Kyle from mainstream liberal commentators. He's willing to critique his own side's failures. He's not interested in team sports. He wants accountability across the board. And you can tell Piers doesn't know how to respond to this because his usual defense is, well, the media is liberal and hostile. But Kyle just proved that even the liberal media undercovers authoritarian actions. So what's the excuse now?
And the fact of the matter is Trump attacks Democrats 4 times as hard as they attack him.
Yeah.
So if anything, the lesson to take away is the opposite. Democrats should get more arrogant, they should get more aggressive, and they should tell the truth more.
Come on, Kyle. You know that would be utter suicide.
No, that's the truth.
You know what? You wouldn't be as good at it as he is, because he does it with humor. You lot all do these incredibly straight-faced, virtue-signaling, I'm outraged by absolutely everything faces. And it's like, if you all just chilled out a bit, have a bit of Kool-Aid,
No.
have a bit of a laugh.
That's why I said Jon Stewart.
Death by mockery. Well, actually, you're right. Jon Stewart gets exactly the right tone. On that, I agree with you.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
we agree. Yeah.
I agree. Let's bring in Nina Turner and the rest of the panel. Nina, you floated that Rahm Emanuel as a new DNC chair would be a good signal that the Democrat Party is only there for the donor class. Many other people would say that Rahm Emanuel's a very effective political operator. But actually, the Democrats need a bit of that muscle now.
It appears very effective at a cover-up. As we know, as mayor of the city of Chicago, he covered up the police murder of Laquan McDonald. He closed many schools in the black community. Certain segments of the black community are very outraged by him. He is more of the same and should be as far away from the DNC as possible. Now, if the Democrats want to lose again and get handed again like they just did in 2024, then go ahead and have Rahm Emanuel there. But if they want to do a new thing and answer to the working class people of this country from all backgrounds, then they need to have somebody there, primarily who's going to say no more dark money in Democratic primaries. Rahm Emanuel is an absolute no. We know that the Chicago Teachers Union feels the same way, and many others will come out against him if he decides to run for that.
Okay. Juan, let me bring you back in, because MSNBC is now at war, which is always entertaining to watch, because Joe Amika from The Morning Show went off and they revealed this morning to go and see Trump in secret at the end of last week after bombarding him with abuse for years and years and years, having originally been great friends of his. But another MSNBC presenter, Katie Fang, has now tweeted, normalizing Trump is a bad idea, period. So clearly there is an internal fracturing going on which I suspect is going on in the Democrat Party at large, because I would urge them to be more collegiate with Trump. I've always felt that he's one of those guys, he's a natural pugilist. If you read his book, The Art of a Deal, he says, if you punch me, I'll punch you 10 times back. Actually, if you go and hang out with Trump, and I've criticized him as much as I've praised him, he can take criticism if he feels like you're not just unrelentingly abusive. So I actually thought that Joe and Mika, we'll play a clip from what they said this morning, but I thought this was a good move on their part. Let's take a look.
And right here is where Kyle delivers the prescription that the Democratic Party desperately needs to hear. He says Democrats should get more arrogant, they should get more aggressive, and they should tell the truth more. This is exactly right. The problem isn't that Democrats have been too mean or too aggressive toward the opposition. The problem is they've been too timid and too cautious and too worried about offending people. Think about the framing here. Piers spent the whole show saying Democrats need to calm down, stop being hysterical, stop overreacting. And Kyle comes back and says, no, actually, the lesson is the opposite. Be more aggressive. Tell the truth more. Because when you're fighting against someone who lies constantly and attacks relentlessly, meeting them halfway doesn't work. You have to actually stand for something and fight for it unapologetically. And notice that even Piers has to admit Kyle is right when he brings up Jon Stewart. He says Jon Stewart gets exactly the right tone on that, I agree with you. Because Jon Stewart does get it. He's funny, he's charismatic, he's entertaining, but he's also willing to call out BS directly and unapologetically. That's the model, not the corporate consultant-approved talking points that sound like they came from a focus group. Now listen to what Nina Turner adds to this. She says about Rahm Emanuel, he is more of the same and should be as far away from the DNC as possible now if the Democrats want to lose again and get handed again. This is the internal fight happening right now. Do Democrats double down on corporate insiders who've presided over massive losses, or do they actually listen to the populist wing that's been right about what voters want? Because here's the thing that establishment Democrats refuse to accept. Working people don't care about your resume or your political experience if you're not delivering material improvements to their lives. They don't care if you're a savvy political operator if their wages are stagnant and their healthcare costs are exploding. That's why someone like Rahm Emanuel represents everything wrong with the party. He's the embodiment of technocratic managerialism that thinks politics is about clever tactics instead of actually fighting for people. And you can see this playing out in real time with the MSNBC situation Piers brings up. Hosts who spent years calling someone a fascist suddenly going to meet with him in private. What message does that send? It sends the message that it was all performance, that none of it was real. And that's exactly what Kyle has been warning about. If you're going to make strong claims, you have to mean them, and you have to act on them consistently. The path forward for progressives is clear. Find authentic messengers who can communicate popular policies effectively. Stop playing defense on culture war nonsense and go on offense with economic populism. Hold the media accountable when they fail to cover what matters. And most importantly, stop being afraid of your own shadow. The opposition isn't going to suddenly start playing nice if you moderate your tone. They're going to attack you no matter what you do. So you might as well stand for something real and fight for it unapologetically. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.